All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. We're right at 3:45. So go ahead and grab your seats. So just a couple housekeeping notes very quickly, and then we'll dive right in. So again, we encourage you to make your way towards the front. We've got plenty of seats here for those that are coming in. If you need to leave during the session, please do so during a natural break, certainly as we transition between speakers or as we start with the Q&A. When the session ends, please exit the room promptly so we can prepare for the next session. If you need the Wi-Fi code, just a reminder, it is RIC 2026. Please remember to silence your electronic devices, and a reminder that all sessions are being video recorded. And then sort of lastly, just a reminder, use the QR code there on the screen. That'll allow you to provide any questions you have that will be selected for the Q&A session. And with that, we will dive right in. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Christian Araguas. I currently serve as the director for the NRC's Division of Engineering in our Office of Nuclear Regulatory Research. I also dub as one of the executive leads for the development of Part 57. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this session titled Enabling the Safe and Timely Deployment of Microreactors, Meeting Critical U.S. Needs Through Innovation and Regulatory Readiness. You know, as I was thinking about this, I was trying to think of like, what kind of a joke? They encouraged you to put a joke in, to lighten the mood. I'm not very good at telling jokes, so I couldn't think of anything, and sort of what popped out as I was preparing is I thought, oh my goodness, the joke is on me. I look at the title and I think this is, and I checked this is the longest title of any of the sessions there, and we're talking about micros. That's not very micro title. So my apologies for that. I assure you that that is not reflective of the approach we've taken on the development of Part 57, but in any event, so Jeremy, John, others, don't let me be responsible for the titles for micro next year. So we are at an exciting moment for nuclear innovation. You know, you've heard that theme, and I really believe that is true. You look at just the increased interest, the ways that companies are thinking about using the various reactor technologies. You think about all of the change that the NRC is considering to enable new nuclear, and it is quite impressive. You know, across the United States and around the world, you know, micros are emerging as potentially transformative technologies, capable of delivering reliable carbon-free energy to locations and applications where traditional energy infrastructure may be difficult or impractical. These systems could support remote communities, military installations, industrial facilities, and energy-intensive technologies, such as data centers, while also enhancing energy security and grid resilience. But realizing that potential requires more than technological innovation. It requires regulatory readiness, strong interagency coordination, and close collaboration between regulators and developers, policymakers, and end users. At the NRC, we are actively working to ensure that our regulatory frameworks are risk-informed, performance-based, and adaptable to emergent technologies, while continuing to uphold our fundamental mission of protecting public health and safety, the common defense and security, and the environment. In recent years, the agency has been focused on improving the efficiency and predictability of licensing processes, enabling innovation while maintaining the rigorous oversight that the public expects from us. And I'll share with you, you know, when we kicked off the thought about this session, it was with the mindset that we would focus on Part 57. And obviously that's not where we're at, but I will tell you, having been a part of that team, I'm really, really excited for that role to hit the street and for you all to see the hard work, the incredible innovative thinking that the team has done. And again, it's emblematic of just the creativity and innovation that the staff has been working under. So with that, today's discussion will explore how these efforts are taking shape, specifically for microreactor technologies. Next slide. I'm sorry, one more slide. Perfect. So during the session, we will examine several important topics, including NRC pathways for licensing microreactors, including approaches for factory fabricated designs, operational and security innovations such as remote monitoring and right-size staffing models, regulatory considerations for transportation and siting, and the importance of coordination with other federal agencies, emergency preparedness approaches appropriate for smaller, lower-risk reactors, and the perspectives and developers and end users who are helping shape deployment readiness for these technologies. Our goal today is to provide a balanced discussion of both the opportunities and the challenges, and to highlight how innovation and sound regulation can work together to support safe and efficient deployment. Next slide. So we have an outstanding panel representing government, industry, technology, development, and end users. Each speaker will offer a different perspective on how micro-deployment can move forward safely and effectively. I'll introduce each of them briefly before we begin. So I'll start with our first panelist, Duke Kennedy, Senior Project Manager in the NRC's Advanced Reactor Policy Branch, also dubs as one of the head technical staff for development of Part 57. Duke leads the agency's microreactor policy efforts, helping to shape the regulatory approaches that will support these technologies. Since joining the NRC in 2005, he has held key roles across non-power and advanced reactor licensing, and he also spent 5 years with the International Atomic Energy Agency, supporting the global adoption of research reactor safety standards. Duke began his nuclear career as a reactor operator at MIT's Nuclear Reactor Laboratory. Please join me in welcoming Duke Kennedy. Our next speaker, Mark Nickel, Executive Director of New Nuclear at the Nuclear Energy Institute. Since 2011, Mark has led NEI's work to address the regulatory and technical challenges facing new and advanced reactors, working closely with utilities, reactor designers, suppliers, and industry partners to help accelerate the deployment of new generation nuclear technologies. Please welcome Mark. We are also pleased to welcome Dr. Rita Barnwell, Chief Nuclear Officer at Radiant. At Radiant, she is helping bring forward what could become the world's first mass-produced portable microreactor. Dr. Barnwell previously served as the U.S. Department of Energy's Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy, and she also held senior leadership roles at Westinghouse, including work on the AP300 Small Modular Reactor Program. Her career spans national laboratories, industry innovation, and major public-private initiatives, making her one of the most influential voices in the advanced nuclear sector today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rita Barnwell. And finally, we are joined by Evan Pierce, Vice President of Site Development and Energy Development for the Americas at EdgeConX. Evan leads the company's regional data center expansion and energy strategy, bringing more than 20 years of experience in power, energy, and digital infrastructure. Prior to EdgeConX, he held leadership roles in global sustainability and EV energy programs at TikTok and Amazon. And he also served 9 years in the U.S. Navy's nuclear propulsion program. Please welcome Evan. And with that, again, we have a terrific lineup for today's discussion, and we'll begin with our first speaker, Duke Kennedy, who will provide an overview of the NRC's work on microreactor policy and licensing pathways. Duke, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you, Christian. Good afternoon. My name is Duke Kennedy. I'm a Senior Project Manager in the Advanced Reactor Policy Branch at the NRC. I'm going to share with you my perspectives on the microreactor landscape, recent regulatory innovations that will enable the timely deployment of microreactors, and thoughts about what 2026 may look like in terms of efforts by the NRC staff to accelerate its pace of innovation. First, I'd like to thank all the NRC staff, managers, and the commissioners for their contributions to the innovations that are modernizing and optimizing the NRC's regulatory framework for microreactors. From my viewpoint as an NRC staff member, the agency has purposefully fostered an open and collaborative environment that encourages creative and critical thinkers across the NRC to focus on our guiding principles of protecting the public health and safety and while enabling the safe use of nuclear technology in new ways. This work is exciting, it's interesting, it's demanding, and it's incredibly rewarding. I'm fortunate and proud to be a part of this team during this pivotal time where the future of nuclear regulation is being shaped for the betterment of our nation. For those of you that have been following regulatory and technological developments in microreactors for the past several years, you know that there isn't a definition of microreactor. Instead, the NRC staff has considered microreactors in terms of general characteristics that we anticipate in their design, operation, and deployment. Some of the main characteristics are shown here in the box on the left of this slide. The first 3 points, low potential consequences in terms of radiological releases, reliance on passive systems and inherent characteristics for safety, and small site footprints could be summarized as microreactors having low risk profiles in terms of safety and environmental effects. The last two could be summarized as microreactors having the potential for new and varied deployment models, which means the way in which a microreactor would be licensed and put into commercial operation at a specific site. These characteristics, and others that aren't shown here, provide a wealth of opportunities for regulatory innovations that both take advantage of and reinforce these characteristics. I've highlighted some of these opportunities for innovations in the box on the right side of this slide and aligned them with the microreactor characteristics on the left. In 2020, the NRC staff provided an information paper to the Commission titled Policy and Licensing Considerations for Microreactors. It laid out 10 topics related to microreactors. Fast forward to this past year, and in April of 2025, the Commission held a meeting titled Microreactors, Current Status and Moving Forward. In that meeting, the NRC staff showed a graphic with 36 microreactor topics and described its plans to address them. And just this last week, at the Idaho National Laboratory's Microreactor Program Review meeting, I heard that the number of developers is nearing 30. And many of these are in active pre-application with the NRC. So I'm highlighting these numbers because they show that the momentum in microreactor development and the breadth of regulatory topics warranting or requiring innovations has grown considerably in just a few years. I believe that this characteristic-based description of microreactors is a boon to the NRC staff and to developers because it encompasses the broad growing landscape of microreactors, and it also provides a framework within which to question the status quo and a basis for articulating why innovating flexible regulatory solutions for microreactors is appropriate. Now I'm going to highlight several recent innovations related to licensing and deployment of microreactors that have been approved by the Commission. In its staff requirements memorandum issued June of 2025, the Commission approved 3 staff recommendations related to licensing and deployment of factory fabricated microreactors, which are shown here. The first is that a microreactor with features to prevent criticality would not be in operation when loaded with fuel, and that operation in these circumstances would begin with the removal of those features. Features to prevent criticality could be a combination of physical means and administrative controls that ensure that a reactor that is loaded with fuel would not be able to achieve a nuclear chain reaction. This allows for the second innovation or innovative approach, which is that a microreactor with features to preclude criticality can be loaded with fuel at a factory under a special nuclear material license without requiring a complete operating license review. Features to prevent criticality would also allow for a microreactor that's loaded with fuel to be transported from a factory to a deployment site covered by an appropriate NRC license for operation of the reactor. This regulatory innovation unlocks a new paradigm in microreactor deployment and was seen by many developers as essential to enabling various microreactor technologies. The Commission also approved an approach for the NRC staff to apply most of the regulations for non-power reactors to authorize fuel loading and operational testing of a microreactor at a factory. An advantage of this approach is that the safety regulations for non-power reactors are well established, largely performance-based, and encompass the expected characteristics of microreactors that would be operated for testing at a factory. Compared to using the frameworks for licensing large commercial reactors, this innovative approach could appropriately reduce the scope of licensing reviews while maintaining adequate protection of public health and safety. In October of 2025, the Commission approved another significant innovation supporting standardization and licensing efficiency for nth-of-a-kind microreactors. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term nth-of-a-kind, it essentially means repeated licensing and deployment of microreactors of a standard design that has already been approved by the NRC through a licensing mechanism such as a manufacturing license or a design certification. The new aspect that was approved by the Commission in its staff requirements memorandum is the ability for the NRC staff to review and approve and afford regulatory finality to operational programs and requirements. This means that the scope of licensing reviews for nth-of-a-kind microreactor deployments can be focused almost entirely on site-specific matters, which has the potential to greatly accelerate these reviews. The staff's paper on nth-of-a-kind microreactor licensing and deployment considerations also describes innovations that don't require formal approval by the Commission, but could also accelerate licensing reviews and deployment of microreactors and potentially other reactor technologies. These include streamlined environmental reviews, a graded approach to site characterization, maximizing design standardization, use of an online portal for licensing, and construction inspections. As a bottom line for what these innovations might achieve for nth-of-a-kind microreactors, the paper provides estimated licensing timeframes as short as 7 months. These estimates rely on the reactor licensing frameworks that are in Part 50 and 52 of the NRC's current regulations, and don't consider any additional optimization that might be accomplished through focused rulemaking. In July of 2024, Congress passed the Accelerating Deployment of Versatile Advanced Nuclear for Clean Energy Act, or the ADVANCE Act, and the President issued Executive Order 14300 ordering the reform of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. In May of 2025, Section 208 of the ADVANCE Act directs the NRC to develop and implement risk-informed and performance-based strategies and guidance to license and regulate microreactors, and it covers 8 broad topical areas and considers opportunities for process improvements. The ADVANCE Act specifically directs the Commission to consider in these efforts the unique characteristics of microreactors, including physical size, design simplicity, and source term. Executive Order 14300, Section 5E, directs the Commission to establish a process for high-volume licensing, high-volume licensing of microreactors and modular reactors, including by allowing for standardized applications and approvals, and by considering to what extent reactors or components thereof should be regulated through general licenses. Those of you who were tuned into yesterday's session, One Government, One Mission, Advancing Safe Deployment of Nuclear Energy, will understand that while the ADVANCE Act and Executive Order provide direction to the NRC, they also provide direction to other federal agencies and the expectation that coordination and collaboration are essential for a successful national strategy for advanced reactors, which includes microreactors. And if you missed that, please check the RIC website for that and other recordings of all the sessions this year's RIC. I have to say that looking at the program for the RIC, it seemed like pretty much every topic on the agenda had relevance to microreactors. So obviously I would consider this to be the premier session of the RIC in terms of microreactors. To fill its safety and security mission and enable microreactor deployment, the NRC staff works proactively to enhance clarity, reliability, and efficiency of licensing and regulation of microreactors. Microreactor developers, potential applicants, and other stakeholders have expressed interest in novel licensing strategies and deployment models, and clarity about the regulatory framework is vital to the planning efforts of stakeholders. In addition, potential approaches to addressing new licensing strategies must be coherent, logical, and practical to allow for safe and secure deployment, with regulatory flexibility being a key goal to accommodate the diverse microreactor designs and deployment models contemplated by developers. Reliability, meaning prompt, fair, and decisive regulation, is crucial to achieving stability in licensing and deployment, especially in the scenario of widespread deployment involving tens or hundreds of reactors per year. Finally, risk-informed and performance-based regulation will help to deliver timely results and use resources effectively. In conclusion, as you heard from Commissioner Weaver this morning during his plenary session remarks and from Christian earlier, the NRC staff has been working to develop a proposed rule that would address the direction in the ADVANCE Act and the executive order for microreactors. Commissioner Weaver also stated his confidence in the NRC staff and our ability to design and deliver the regulatory innovations needed to enable safe and secure microreactor deployment. And I thank him for his remarks. Along with the Commissioner's remarks, I hope that the perspectives that I've shared about microreactor characteristics and the opportunities for innovations they afford, as well as the NRC's recent innovations related to microreactor licensing and deployment that I've highlighted, provide a strong signal that the NRC staff is accelerating innovation to meet this moment. So I thank you for your attention. Thank you to those of you who have engaged in NRC's microreactor activities over the past few years, and I look forward to your questions and discussion with the other panel members, as long as it doesn't get too much into the details of any proposed rules. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Duke, for that update on all of the policy considerations that have been underway on microreactors. I very much appreciate you staying away from Part 57, so nice job. And he got me thinking, he said premiere. I thought maybe next year's title is Premiere Session on Microreactors. So we'll think about it. All right, next up is Mark Nickel, and he'll give the industry perspective on what could work or what would be helpful for a microreactor framework. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, everybody. I want to start with the word enabling, because not only is it the first word in this session, it's also one of the main things in the NRC's updated mission, the new thing. And it's been talked about, I think, by everybody at this RIC conference. And so let's really look into enabling, because it's more than just a buzzword now. It actually has real purpose. And what the purpose is, if we look at what enabling means, it has to enable the business models for the technology that are out there. And so if we ask ourselves, great, what does that mean? Well, we first look at what is the business model, what are the metrics of success for that, and ask ourselves the question, can those be achieved within the regulatory framework, or are there opportunities to optimize? But it's also a process. It's a process, Christian, I'm glad you said it, it's a process of collaboration. But it's also a process of iteration. So if we take those three things, we take the regulations, we take the business model or business case, we take the technology, all three of those have to iterate into alignment. Because as you learn something about one of those sides, the other two adapt to it. So as we form the business model or the technology, you might form it around what the NRC regulations are today. But then you look and say, well, that's not the business model I want something different. And then you look and, well, what's the technology that enables that? And then you look and, well, that's not a regulatory framework that enables this. And so then you work on that. Now, within those three things, they all have, I'll say, requirements that are inflexible. You can never change them. And then they have levers and knobs that you can change. So we all know that if we look at the regulatory side of that, you cannot change the mandate that you have to protect the public health and safety. Similarly, on the business side, you have the mandate that it has to be commercially viable. On the technology side, we have physics. You can't violate that law. So there are things you can do and things you can't do, and you need people that are experts in all of those working together to be able to do that. That's the the collaboration. But I want to talk about RHYDRA, Rapid High Volume Deployable Reactor. It was a proposal developed by NEI with a lot of our members, a large team. It was a very condensed, but it was a very intense effort. And I'll say it's radical, a paradigm shift, and it really broke the mold. So why did it do that? If, as we talked about, I've been doing this for a decade now, why was it now that we made this revolutionary breakthrough with RHYDRA? And we did it in a way that protects the public health and safety, enables brand new business models that weren't possible before. And the answer is this, is that we started with the business case and we didn't start with the technology. And the business case was this. So back in 2024, the beginning of the year, there was a company, Shepherd Power, came out of the oil and gas industry, sent a letter to the NRC, came to us and told us the same thing and said, oil and gas industry wants nuclear technologies. They've looked at all the risks. There's one red flag risk, and that's regulatory. And if that red flag risk doesn't become resolvable by the end of the year, and it doesn't mean all the issues go away, but there had to be confidence that it could be resolved, then the oil and gas industry is going to look somewhere else for its energy needs. And so that was the challenge that we needed. And I'm going to talk through how we did that. So what we resulted in is a 500-page proposal to the NRC, and we actually had a supplement to that as well the following year to slightly expand it. And the reason it's 500 pages is because to actually make change, we have to get beyond just talking optimistically about we're going to do this. We're all cheerleaders. I love that. But we have to be practical and detailed. We have to show our work exactly how we're going to make this stuff safe, enable the business model, how it meets the requirements of physics. And so it takes that much volume to be able to do that. And we're very optimistic that those ideas are going to make themselves into Part 57 as well as other wholesale rulemaking packages for 50, 52, 53. So I want to talk a little bit about what it is. I can't go into 500 pages worth of detail, so let me give you the background of why this matters and how we got here. And it all started when microreactors were first talked about, let's say in 2018. It might have been a little bit before that. The whole premise of overcoming the reduced economies of size is that it was economies of, I'm going to say simplicity. Others will have their own way of discussing it, whether it's volume, serial manufacturing or other things. But it really looked at the safety case and the smaller size enabling a lot more inherent features, gravity, natural circulation. You can take credit for physics. It doesn't fail. And so that unlocked a lot of performance improvements. And that's where everything was going before we got that challenge from the oil and gas industry. And this is what the business cases look like. This was a 2019 report looking at the cost estimates at that time for the technology. And you have to break it down by the market. So I talked about these have to be commercially viable. Ultimately, it means you have to provide power at prices that the markets will pay for it. And we can get into that another time. And so here are 4 areas that we were primarily looking at that time. And it showed microreactors, even in the high cost estimates, could enter into some markets. You get better costs, you can enter into more markets. But you can even see, if you can't read it, it varies between 10 cents a kilowatt hour and 40 cents a kilowatt hour. Still quite expensive compared to, I know what companies want to get to is much lower than that, and I know the market wants them to do that as well. So the only way you do that is you figure out a smarter way of doing things, and we think that's called RHYDRA. And so when we got that challenge from the oil and gas industry, there were 2 requirements, and you have to have metrics. You have to have something you can compare it against objectively, and the 2 metrics they gave is that it had to be deployed within 6 months. Deployed means from the date you identify you want a reactor to the date it's producing power for what you need it for. And imagine that. At that time, yes, thank you, 6 months, the schedule for a deployment for a microreactor back then was about 48, 49 months based on the optimistic NRC schedule. And this was based on the Hermes review, which broke records for NRC review. And so you're talking about going from 49 months to 6 months. And the NRC's process in there, we had to, to try and test and see if this was even possible, we had to allocate what the budget we had for. So for time, we ended up being able to allocate the NRC 4 months. And we said, all right, so because you have other parts of the process. So the question is, could we design a process that the NRC reasonably could perform all the work that they need to do to protect the public health and safety within 4 months rather than 18 to 24. It was 24 back at that time. I know that it's 14 or 18 now. And so we had to look at it. We had to reevaluate from the very beginning the first principles. We couldn't just say we've done it all. We've always done it this way. How can we marginally improve it? We had to go to the very beginning and say, if we redesign this today based on the technology that we have and the goals of the business model, where would we get to? So we said, first place to start is let's look at the safety profile. We've been talking for a long time that the regulations should be commensurate with the hazard or the safety profile. Let's start there. And we found out microreactor safety profile are much more like research test reactors, much more like fusion and medical, way down the spectrum if you were to look at it compared to large reactors. And when we reflected on that insight, it was, yes, we absolutely have to find a different starting point, not the regulations as they exist for large reactors, but somewhere else. And so we knew we had 2 choices. We could start blank sheet, completely redesign regulation from nothing, or we could find an equivalent to start from that the NRC's already accepted and has familiarity with and knows that for reactors like that, it produces safety. And since it was similar research and test reactors in the hazard and risk profile, we decided to start there. And it was important that we did. And the reason that I believe we had so much success in developing a different process in regulatory frameworks is that, this was a key insight after the work, is that you're anchored to your starting point. We were always trying to work down the regulations from large reactors based on the technology, and we were making progress. Back then seemed like good progress. But you can only go so far because you're anchored to your starting point. And so when we looked at research test reactors, we had a different starting point, a better anchor for the technology. And yes, we recognized it may not be perfect. We actually may have to add regulation to that or additional things beyond what existed because it is a different technology. But you're starting from a much better, much closer starting point to what you needed to get to. So the end of that, I talked about the 6 months. The other metric I forgot to mention was cost. Regulatory costs had to be less than 1% of total cost, which is difficult for a microreactor, but RIDRA did that. And then, the total costs have to be good as well. So this was the schedule metric. We took that 4 years. I know this is an art chart, but you'll get the slides afterwards and you can examine it. It's in our report too. And it shows how the NRC process could get to 6 months with a radical redesign. Now, I'll say not all these ideas were brand new. The NRC was at that same time developing their own ideas, nth of a kind reactor, and they were remarkably similar to ours in terms of how you would structure a review. The essence of it is this: if the NRC has to review a certain scope of information to come to their conclusions, and let's call it 10,000 pages, if that is the scope of an actual application, it's going to typically take a long time. So how could you take that 10,000 pages, try to do as much as possible once? This isn't a new idea. Design certifications is like this. Do as much as you can for once, and then for each site, you have a smaller page count, let's say 100 pages. But then can we actually change the nature of that review? Rather than all of this being new information and new analyses and calculations, which take a lot more effort to review and approve, could you have done all of that site-specific stuff once generically to create an envelope? Again, not a new idea, but they've never been put together. And so that your application is actually confirming that the actual site conforms to what the NRC has already approved. And that is the key to unlocking this short cycle. And we just heard from Duke that the NRC also sees the short reviews are feasible. The last thing we did at the very end of the paper or the effort, and this was part of the supplement to clarify, is that we realized that many of the issues, there were over 35 issues, well, there were 35 issues in this paper. Many of them could apply to larger reactors. We didn't start out that way, but we looked at it and said, you know what, wow, a lot of them were tied to emergency planning zone, not everything. But a lot of them we looked and said, this isn't exclusive to a microreactor. If you can define this performance metric of site boundary emergency planning zone, for example, you should be able to utilize this. It's still the same case for safety. And so at the very end, we analyzed and identified which of these issues could be applied. And some of them are an integrated approach. You may not get all of the benefits that microreactors get from a particular area, but you could get some of the benefits if you're a little bit larger and your safety profile is a little bit different. So, being able to apply what you learn outside of the specific application in which you developed it was an important thing. We're not done yet. First, all of the 500 pages wasn't enough detail, at least in my opinion, to convince the NRC that they should just accept it. We have more work to do in level of detail, and there's certain areas that are priorities here. And you can see these. These are areas where we were developing or planning to develop guidance, and some have been submitted, some we're still working on. But there are a number of areas where we need to show more work. 4 months is not a lot of time to do all of the work for everything. We did as much as we could. Here's the rest of our work. The other thing I'll say in terms of the not yet done is that we developed it with a very specific business model in mind, with very specific objectives. I believe we're going to have additional business models come forward. And in fact, I can tell you, I've talked with companies in the maritime industry space, and they would like to apply this, but it's not going to work perfectly for them. So I'm sure there's going to have to be some adaptations for that application. And others, some may have a business model that you need to deploy within 7 days. We got to 6 months. What can we do to get to 7 days? I don't know yet. We haven't done the work. So, but I'm sure we can get there, and we can do it safely. We just have to figure it out. So with that, happy to turn it over and answer questions later.
Thank you, Mark, for that presentation and for giving us a reminder of what was in the Ridger letter and the things that are important considerations for the NRC as we go forward. So next, we have Dr. Rita Barnwell, who will talk about how microreactor technologies are evolving and what it will take to move from concept to practical deployment at scale. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you to the NRC for this opportunity to share with you what Radiant is doing. I'm absolutely privileged that Radiant was invited as the microreactor on this premier microreactor panel. To me, that's quite telling. For the couple of you that know me, you will not be surprised that I'm already going to go off script. So if you have paid attention to what has been going on around the world lately, it is devastating. There is a 3-layer problem that is evident in Iran. Number 1, the regional energy infrastructure is targetable. Number 2, fuel logistics and tanker routes are contestable. And number 3, many installations still rely on diesel, host nation grids, or both. So to my international colleagues, forgive me for a moment, I'm going to give some US statistics here. An example of some of the CENTCOM bases that are at risk, some of which have already been targeted by Iranian missiles, include the El Udeid Air Base in Qatar. It relies on at least 15 to 30 megawatts of critical electricity. It's the region's largest US air hub with more than 10,000 personnel in over 90 combat and support aircraft. The Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia relies on 8 to 15 megawatts electric critical. It's centered on the 378th Air Expeditionary Wing and air missile defense support. And then you have the NSA Bahrain 5th Fleet headquarters that relies on 8 to 15 megawatts critical. It's naval headquarters and support complex that serves over 8,000 personnel. So even just 5 megawatts electric of nuclear power at these bases could power the most critical systems. And I don't use the word critical typically unless it means truly nuclear critical, but in this case, it's actually critical in the sense of vital. 5 megawatts equates to 9,000 gallons of diesel, or 4 truckloads per day. 5 megawatts electric equates to 5 megawatts of nuclear would alleviate the need for one fully loaded Army LCU 2000 tankers worth of fuel every 3 weeks. So I want to set that stage as context for why microreactors are important as a use case. And I know Evan's going to talk about data centers, so I'm going to leave that use case to him. So Radiant has developed our Kaleidos reactor that I like to call a megawatt in a box. This reactor makes us inherently survivable if our military wants to put this reactor anywhere that missiles are flying. Survivability is essential for any deployable system. That's not the case for any other reactor that requires a building. So this reactor is small enough for a C-17, which means it's also small enough for hardened shelters and bunkers. So it takes less than 48 hours to install once the site has been selected. It has fencing and shielding that allows a public adjacent operation. It is built in our factory in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, here in the US. And it arrives overnight, so it can be set up in less than 2 days. It uses helium coolant and TRISO fuel, and the spent fuel from these reactors are returned to our factory in Oak Ridge for storage in dry casks. There's 0 on-site waste that's generated, and it ships by land, by sea, or by air. So I want to thank the NRC staff. We have engaged with them over the past couple of years, but we engaged with them very closely over the past several months. And in my nearly 30-year career, I've engaged with the NRC quite a bit, but this time, it's different. They are so quick to respond and so thoroughly prepared and wanting to move forward together. It feels so different. It feels, and forgive me for using this word because I'm not sure that it's allowable, but it feels like a partnership. And to be able to work that way together to achieve a common goal, to achieve the president's executive orders that were laid out last year, feels like we've got a team moving forward. So there's a couple areas where we are working together here. R50 is the name of our reactor fabrication facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. R stands for Radiant, 50 stands for the number that we are going to produce every year. It is a nod to the heritage of the site. It is built on the former Manhattan Project site, K27 and K29. And we are about to break ground on this facility very soon. Just late last month, we submitted our Part 70 application for this facility, for the fueling facility. So we look forward to a positive response from the NRC staff, no pressure. But as we move forward, speaking of no pressure, we are eagerly awaiting Part 57 and Part 53 and the other rulemakings that are coming out of this agency. And we can't wait, you can't issue it fast enough. And so Duke already kind of prefaced that we can't pepper him with detailed questions about Part 57. So good job there. We have not yet, we are awaiting the release of those so that we can actually narrow in on whether we will use Part 50, 52, 53, or 57 as we move forward. But it is wonderful to have this portfolio of options to choose from. So I want to give you a little timeline of where we are as a company. We were founded in 2020, and you'll see a lot of the tests that have been performed to date. Notably, we submitted, as I said, our Part 70 application for using special nuclear material. We are, as we speak, the team has been assembling our reactor in El Segundo, California. Just before I popped in here, I posted on social media. You can see a quick video of the reactor coming together. So take a look, not right now, wait till this session's done. But take a look, and you can see the progress that the team is making. This reactor will be shipped to Idaho National Lab next month. This table shows, the timeline shows KDU criticality. That is one mere step. More important than going critical, we will be at full power in July. We will operate at over 150 hours at full power and then operate continuously as well. We have 1 year in Dome, which is where we are testing our Kaleidos demonstration unit. So some images here. These are actually, because of the NRC staff runs a pretty tight ship and had us put our slides together a little bit ahead of time. These are actually of our passive cool-down test and not of our actual reactor. But if I were to share some slides with you today, these would be actually of the actual reactor. So what you see on the right side is our passive cool-down test. It's everything except the actual fuel. So we had thermocouples that were in 37 of the monoliths to test the cool down feature of the reactor. Let's see. Next slide. Those are, when I hired in at Radiant, I had 2 questions for them. One was, where are you getting your fuel? And the second was, where are you getting your graphite? And when they had great answers for both of them, I was like, oh, okay, this is where I want to be. These are our graphite reflectors, surrounded by some of our top talent here at Radiant. And I will leave you with where you can find out more about us and the fact that we are hiring more talent. And so you can visit us at radiantnuclear.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita, for that. Thank you for grounding us and reminding us of the importance of what we do, whether you're as a regulator or an industry, both domestically and internationally, as well as giving us an update on Radiant's technology. So thank you for that. And next we have Evan Pierce, who will give us a perspective from end user, specifically as for data centers. So Evan.
Thanks, Christian. I also was going to tell a nuclear power joke, but I realized it's not critical to do so. So I'm actually very honored to be here and get invited to speak at this NRC event. I never thought when I was a baby nuke I would ever get an opportunity like this, so I'm going to take advantage of it to the maximum extent possible. Also great, every time I'm in a room full of nuclear power professionals, I know I'm not the smartest man in the room, which is fun. So my name's Evan Pierce. I work for a company called EdgeConneX. We're a global data center developer. Our primary focus right now is on AI data centers. We have 80 data centers across the globe serving more than 1 gigawatt of critical load, which is about 50% more of that is actually utility load. And we have about 30 data centers under construction right now in across the globe. I think the perspective from the data center industry right now is we're seeing such a massive amount of capital being spent on data centers that it's a little bit mind-boggling. 6 years ago, what got me into the industry was this pitch that this is like the Industrial Revolution, that this kind of build out and infrastructure will probably never happen again. And I think what we're seeing right now is something that makes that pale in comparison. I know multiple of our customers are going to spend more than $100 billion this year alone on data center infrastructure. And so from our perspective, this may be the last great infrastructure build out. The AI infrastructure that we're building. And we're kind of operating without a map. the gigawatts, not megawatts, the gigawatts that we're deploying are really fundamentally changing the topology of the transmission system and putting power flow constraints on the transmission system, challenging generation capacity. But I think we've kind of all acknowledged in the industry that we're living through a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Let me get to the go. Oh, that's kind of small. Apologies. So I wanted to kind of cover what data centers are to start with. You hear data center, kind of like, well, what is that? And there's a lot of different ways that you can slice and dice the data center industry. You've got on the left here, you see the interconnected edge, which is where my company got to start. So very small data centers, and there's a bunch of different models there. We're now in the hyperscale data center world. So when you hear hyperscale, that just means those massive, tens, hundreds, gigawatt scale data center campuses. What we hear a lot about now is AI. I think it's important when we come up to talk about that to distinguish between kind of like the two different flavors of AI that we see right now. The one you're probably the most familiar with is the training models. So the large language models, ChatGPT and et cetera. Those models, you can kind of like, I think very simply think of just taking a snapshot in time of the internet, and there's a certain amount of energy it takes to produce that model, and those generally take gigawatt scale campuses over multiple locations. And then what we do anticipate seeing, and I'd love to get a question from the audience about this later, kind of my perspective on where I think we're going, is these companies that we lease space to for our data centers, they eventually have to make money from that, and so we will start to see this shift, I believe, towards AI inference. AI inference is the product, and it's very similar to what we've seen in the past with cloud. And what that kind of means practically is when we talk about AI training, these are remote data centers, potentially, that could be in the middle of nowhere, that could leverage large power supplies. But as we start to move to that AI inference, we start to move kind of back to the city, back to those major metro areas. And the problem with the industry is the more demand there is in the area, the more demand there is in the area. And so that creates the need for dense power solutions that match the dense load that these AI data centers use. Kind of a joke I'll tell everyone now is, when we go speak to customers, everybody has a gigawatt, but nobody has a gigawatt. And that is the problem that we have to solve now. This is not a megawatt problem. This is a gigawatt scale problem. I have a campus right now I'm developing that's going to be 4.5 gigawatts when it's done. And that is not the largest campus that I've seen in the United States alone. So I do have difficulty seeing how we can solve that problem with the current technology. And I think microreactors, many microreactors, is a key part of that future with data center growth. The kind of things that we look for, when we're trying to build data center, that, we're looking to comply with utility topology requirements. As I mentioned before, part of the problem with that is we're changing the fundamental nature of the topology of these electric grids. And so we're using so much power, we can't move it from those remote locations like we could before. And so that means we need to have dense power solutions like microreactors to kind of help solve that problem. We need reliable and resilient power. So we need something that we can depend on. In the industry with the cloud computing, for example, there's a 5.9 requirement. In AI, we're starting to see 4, kind of slipping down to 3. But we need reliable power for our customers, so our customers can serve their customers, and those customers are you. That's everything on your cell phone is dependent on this. And I think you've probably all in this room experienced when you've had some kind of AWS outage or some kind of Microsoft outage that you can't access your bank. Your business may shut down because all of that compute has been shifted from the company locally to the cloud. Project schedules. It's great to hear that this expedited process in licensing, that's actually really promising, I think, for the nuclear industry and for our industry. Something I realized after a few years in tech was that tech moves at the speed of light, but infrastructure moves at the speed of concrete. And that fundamental mismatch in need and ability to deliver is crucial. Speed kills in this industry. So the faster we can come up with power supply options that serve our customers, the quicker we can deploy AI data centers. I'm going to get to the questions, so I'm going to kind of get to this quickly. Oh my gosh, this text is small. I'll skip through this. I'll just stop it right there. I really want to get to the Q&A, Christian. So.
Thank you, Evan. I appreciate it. I very much appreciate your excitement and ready to get to the Q&A. So let's just dive in. And I don't know if perfect. We've got the QR code up there. So please, as a reminder, if you have any questions, I'll be monitoring here, and we'll try to select as many as I can for the remaining 34 minutes that we've got. So let me start. First question. I'm going to go to Mark. You touched on this a bit in your presentation, but what makes microreactors fundamentally different from traditional nuclear plants in terms of risk profile, deployment model, and operational paradigm, and how should that difference shape regulatory readiness?
Yeah, there's a lot in that. Those are a lot of areas, but so I'll just hit as many as I can. The difference is, so the first, we're going to take the risk profile, because that is a key enabler when it comes to regulatory changes in the RIDR proposal. And the key difference, there is a size difference, so there's just less radioactive material to deal with. But as you get to the smaller sizes, it's much easier to incorporate what I talked about, the natural circulation, the inherent physics, gravity, those sorts of things. And because they're so reliable, different from engineered systems with active components that have failure rates you have to account for, then it just results in much lower potential harm to the public, both in we talk in risk, right? And I'm not talking PRA number risk. I'm talking about risk in terms of what can go wrong, fewer things. How likely is it? Much less likely. And what are the consequences of that happening? Much lower consequences. So if you just think about it in those three terms, that's the main difference in terms of the risk profile. And if you think about it, well, that's still conceptual. Look at it in terms of the size of the emergency planning zone. So large reactors today is 10 miles. We talk about advanced reactors, many of them being able to get down to site boundary, and microreactors as well. Well, what is site boundary? It has to have a distance to it, right? Is it a couple of 100 meters, which an SMR might be? Or for microreactors, it could be the walls of the building that it's inside, and that building is very, very small itself. So that's really critical. Now, the thing about the deployment models, and I think Rita and Evan covered those really well, but it's all about, I'll actually say agility, because it's more than just speed, it's flexibility as well, right? These things can be deployed quickly. They can be deployed for lots of applications. Different technologies have even different features that are more attractive to different applications. But it's that type of flexibility.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. And I agree with everything you said, and I think that really underscored the importance of developing a separate regulation specifically for microreactors. So let me offer that same question to Rita and Duke. Anything to add to that?
The only other thing I would add is that microreactors are designed to be fail-safe with full loss of site power being the safe state for the plant. So that does differentiate us from what I would say traditional power plants.
Yeah, thanks, Christian, and thanks, Mark and Rita. So I agree with Mark, with Rita about their comments. I think it goes along with what I mentioned in terms of looking at microreactors based on characteristics as opposed to any strict definition. But I think for me, one thing that is so fundamentally different is actually the size and the way that these reactors can be moved around. and how that's really challenging us to look for new regulatory approaches to enable these new and novel deployment models. So the regulatory framework that we have in place now in Part 50 and Part 52 is largely built up on the experience of large light water reactors. We're going to be coming out with Part 53 that offers a risk-informed approach for all reactor technologies, and we'll be having Part 57, which is focused more on microreactors. And so it's been an opportunity and a responsibility to really consider these fundamental differences and to devise appropriate strategies.
Thank you, Duke. All right, we're going to jump to our next question. Evan, I'm going to start with you. For industrial sites or data centers, what siting flexibilities and constraints should end users anticipate?
I think the biggest constraint we're seeing right now is something that nuclear power has faced, for decades, and that's public sentiment and community buy-in. We're seeing it now. It's probably my number one concern, this kind of coordinated effort to keep data centers and AI out of communities, due to misinformation and lack of understanding of the technology. And I think it'd be pretty easy to predict you would see something similar with SMRs, and especially if they're going to be co-located with AI resources. Now you're putting a nuclear power plant in our backyard and a data center. So I think getting past the public sentiment, educating the populace on the safety of these new SMRs, the reliability, understanding those concerns, and getting out in the community is probably my primary concern right now.
Excellent, thank you. And I want to open that up to Rita or Mark. Any perspectives to add?
Yeah, I would agree with Evan. That was a great answer. I'll add to it on the technical regulatory side, because as you look at, if we need to deploy these quickly and license these quickly, then you start wondering, well, what are the site-specific considerations that have to be made, and how do you do that quickly? And so the concept in RIDRA was this type of separation between the reactor design and the site, and there's lots of different ways to do that. But basically what it means is that reactor needs to essentially be pre-approved for sites, considering all the external hazards. Those are the ones that are most unique to each particular site. So whether it's seismic, flooding, meteorology plays a big impact. You need to be able to generically disposition those so that when you go to a site, those aren't, they have to be demonstrated, but they're not things that have to be completely reviewed from scratch.
And I'll add, not needing to have different regulations from state to state in the United States, and then for country to country, I think would be very helpful given the size, the small size of microreactors, that the technology hasn't changed. If we can continue to have NRC and, as an example, ONR and CNSC continue to work together, extrapolate that to other countries internationally for regulating microreactors.
Thank you, Rita. All right, next question, coming to you, Duke. How is the NRC addressing licensing and associated design requirements for remote and autonomous operation of microreactors to support their commercial deployment models?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So the NRC has been doing a lot of work, I guess, over the past couple of years now, interfacing with stakeholders and developers, nuclear developers, as well as other technology developers, about what is the state of the art in technology and operational models for remote monitoring, for remote operation, for autonomous operation. And so we've been collecting information to help inform our I would say, eventual, development of regulatory readiness for these technologies in terms of microreactors. So while we have a strong understanding that these operational models are seen as critical to eventual widespread deployment of microreactors in many instances, let's say this is an area where we're really trying to monitor the state of the art and to be ready to review those applications for those types of use cases when we see them.
Thank you, Duke, and I'll add, because I know my previous division and research was leading some of the research activities, so a plug to Nia Hughes Green and Stephanie Morrow. We've been on top of this, I think, for several years now. I think trying to understand the landscape and making sure that we would be well positioned to enable somebody that would want to use this in the future. So I think more is forthcoming in the near term, and so we're excited to get that out. All right, moving along. So this, I'm going to go down the line, give everybody an opportunity to respond. So what do the panelists see as the most important drivers in the past few years in accelerating microreactor development, and what will sustain or further increase this momentum? So I will start with you, Duke.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, I think there have been a lot of drivers, but I'll just speak about what's been happening in NRC. And I think one of the big drivers, and this isn't to toot my own horn in any way, is that the NRC staff has really been encouraged and empowered to think innovatively about how we're going to be able to most effectively regulate these technologies. And so I think the creativity, the willingness to challenge preconceived notions, to re-examine the status quo, and to go back to the basics of what it is that we're required to do by the Atomic Energy Act and what are the flexibilities that we have as regulators have been a huge driver for where we are now and where we're about to get to.
Yeah, so I'll start with the driver, and the driver is the market needs, I'd say demand, and it's in different market areas than we've seen in the historical past. So nuclear has always served grid-scale electric. What we're talking about with microreactors, yes, you can do that, but the main drivers for microreactors are what Rita and Evan talked about: defense, data centers, what I talked about, maritime, there's mining, remote applications, that they need nuclear. They absolutely need nuclear, but they have to have it in these small sizes. And there's even a range within microreactors, but that is the driver and what is propelling the need for all this. That's why we have 30 companies, because they all see the market size and the need to decarbonize with highly resilient power, and nuclear is the only one, the only source that is available for them today. And so then the question is, well, what's going to sustain this? And I really believe it's success. If you're familiar with the Advanced Reactor Roadmap, we talk about the only thing that's going to continue to drive progress is demonstrating success. So these critical but these criticality demonstrations by July 4th, that is a step of demonstrating success. It's not the final endpoint, but it's something that everybody can look at and say, you know what, this could be real. It's not a dream. We're moving into delivering things, and that continues, and we'll get bigger milestones as we go forward. And then within that, if we look farther into the future, what's going to take this from potentially the wrong path, which is the technologies just didn't work out, to the right path, which is we're as successful as everybody wants us to be and needs us to be. It's going to come down to the cost profile and the performance of these reactors, and there's a lot of work that's being done in that area.
So we did not compare notes, but that's a perfect segue. So what I wanted to add was that it's not just the use cases. The market is absolutely there today. In addition, our clients are now saying, when's the cost going to become even more attractive? And so it depends on certainly economies, not of scale, but economies of volume. And so R50, our factory, comes into play here. And when you start to mass produce these reactors, and the cost, of course, will come down. So as our order books fill up, which is a good thing, we start to have dozens of reactors come off the line, and you start to achieve economies of volume, and it addresses that cost issue.
All right, now look into my crystal ball here for drivers. I think you've, or the drivers have been covered. As far as maintaining momentum, I actually kind of think there's maybe at least three things that are on top of mind. Number one is sustainability. We saw a shift maybe 2.5 years ago with tech, where they started to change the language from renewable goals to carbon-free goals. And I think that was a very passive acknowledgement that to maintain the growth that they see, that they're going to need to deploy nuclear power as part of that. I think that was there was a very clear reason to change that from renewables to carbon-free. The second is grid and energy security. We are certainly going to start to see resource adequacy problems in the United States with the load growth that we're seeing. I mean, not just data centers, I think that's driving it, but also electrification is driving it. From a technical perspective, inertia is something no one ever talks about. You know, when you start to shift these large rotating mass generation resources in the grid to inverter-based, you start to lose inertia. And as you electrify, you start to lose inertia. The grid is desperately going to need rotating mass, large steam turbines in the system to maintain grid stability. And that is something I think we're going to see sooner than later. And then finally, I think we probably all could acknowledge that we're in an AI arms race right now. And there is certainly some national security implications there. And without rapid deployment of highly dense energy sources like SMRs, I have a lot of difficulty understanding how we can actually win this AI arms race.
Yeah, thanks, Evan, for those insights. And I think thanks to the panel, I think all extremely valuable. And I want to stay with you, Evan, piggybacking on your response. So why do we think that gigawatt data centers will be successful with microreactors? What makes that more attractive than large-scale generation on a reliable grid with lots of margin?
I mean, we're seeing it across the country where a great example is there's a utility that I work with in Texas that has 200 gigawatts of large load interconnection requests. 200 gigawatts. The state of Texas is only 85 gigawatts. And there's no possible way that they could deploy those gas resources, renewable resources in time to meet that demand. So there needs to be another technology added to the mix. And, I talked earlier about changing the topology. One of the big grid concerns, from a regulator standpoint and from an ISO standpoint is the loss of your largest generator. And what we're starting to see now is loads that are larger than the largest generation in that grid. And losing the load is just as dangerous, if not more, than losing the generation. And having strong grid connections with, highly dense energy resources located adjacent to the highly dense loads, it just makes sense. And right now, the only option we really have is gas. That's why Texas is booming, but that's not going to be suitable everywhere. I mean, not everyone has the access to gas like Texas does, and this is going to be a nationwide problem.
Excellent, thank you. And I want to offer that same question, Rita, as you talked about the data center use cases. So anything to add to that?
Not really, no. That was good. That was good.
All right, well, then we'll put Mark on the hopper. Anything additional?
My rule is don't follow a perfect answer with something less perfect, so yeah.
All right, good enough. We will keep moving. So let me offer a question. I'm going to go back to you, Rita. So what innovations do you see as most critical for enabling microreactors to move from demonstration projects to widespread commercial deployment in the next 5 to 10 years?
Sure. So there's certainly materials and modeling, but given that this is the regulatory information conference, I'll talk about more on the regulatory methodology. I think a methodology that establishes more general guidance and involves a regulator team that is embedded with the design team early on is a substantial improvement. Similar to what defense oversight teams do with prime subcontractors, a regulatory team that's embedded gets to see the issues, understand what is going on with the testing and the analysis firsthand as the design is being developed and built and iterated on. I do want to mention that the NRC is already doing this, so I'm not offering something new and creative. It's already being done, but I think more of it has to be done. Radiant and other microreactor developers have enjoyed having NRC staff attend our design reviews as observers in anticipation, these are my words, but in anticipation of similar applications coming to them as NRC applications. But these design reviews have been for DOE authorization. So, for example, last October, we had at Radiant our preliminary documented safety analysis design review, and we had 2 of the NRC staff attend in person and then several attend remotely to observe as we were going through this process with the Department of Energy. So I'm grateful for that type of, I think, vision is what I would call it, because NRC is looking forward to and anticipating what is to come in front of them, and at the same time offering, hopefully to us, advice and suggestions on what we can do better to make our application more robust before it gets to them.
Mark?
Yeah, if I could add, yeah, the great answer. I agree with that. There's a lot of things that have to be demonstrated, developed to go to the high volume deployment aspect of that RIDRA. But I'm just going to focus on one because it's the most important in my opinion, and it's the most important by far, and that's cost. Because the cost structure of microreactors is highly sensitive to a lot of different parameters. And you've got the capital cost, and then you've got the O&M cost. The capital cost, Rita already talked about, the serial manufacturing, high volume manufacturing, that does a lot of the lifting. There are a lot of other things that have to happen to go along with that. The most challenging, and this is my opinion, the most challenging is on the O&M side, because for some of these, if you've got a small facility or a small megawatt facility, one person on site at all times eats up your entire O&M budget. And so the cost structure is what we need to demonstrate, and it can be done, but it has to be demonstrated.
Excellent, thank you. All right, we're going to shift gears, and I'm going to stay with you, Mark, and then I'll go to you, Rita, next. What are the strategies being considered for transporting fueled reactor modules? Start with you, Mark, first.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I thought it went to Rita first. Okay. Yeah, the considerations for transporting fueled modules, there are a lot. The work has already been ongoing for a long time. Certainly safety is top of mind because you're transporting a microreactor with fuel in it. We do transport fuel in canisters. We transport used fuel in canisters, but it's slightly different. The packages are not exactly the same. The configurations inside are not exactly the same. All the considerations are the same. Criticality, all of that sort of stuff is the same. But it's a unique engineering problem, which can be overcome, but it's a unique problem. And then, more importantly, so that takes care of accident conditions. More importantly is you want it to get to the site and everything still be intact so you can operate it, right? If you've transported it and the fuel has been damaged, you're not going to be able to operate it the way you had hoped. So there's a lot of engineering that needs to go into that as well. And I know there's a lot of NRC rules that need to be put in place and clarified. Features to preclude criticality is a key one that's ongoing, but yeah.
Thank you for that. Rita?
So I showed kind of a cutaway of our reactor concept when I was speaking. It's 1 megawatt electric, and it is designed to fit into what's like a shipping container, a Connex. The regulations for shipping containers, though, don't assume that you've got a fueled reactor on the inside, so that certainly needs to be addressed as well. And understanding the true needs of the package that we are shipping and what is required to safely ship that, given that we have advanced fuel in that reactor, also needs to be considered. Very fortunately for Radiant, the last slide that I put up there talked about the talent that we have. We have deep expertise in nuclear transport on our team, and so I'm very confident that we will be able to very safely address this very specific topic.
Thank you. All right, Duke, I've given you a break, so hopefully you're ready to go for the next question. Given the microreactor characteristics listed on the slide, what kind of guidance does the staff and industry have to differentiate between microreactor and an SMR to ensure a consistent, predictable application of those characteristics?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So if you look at the papers that the NRC staff has provided the commission, the paper in 2024 on factory fuel loading and operational testing at a factory, and in 2025 on nth-of-a-kind licensing, we wrote those papers for microreactors and for the characteristics that we were anticipating for microreactor designs and operation. But we also stated clearly in those papers, and the commission reiterated it in their staff requirements memorandum on one of those papers, that these strategies that we're developing and these approaches that we're taking for these unique licensing scenarios may in many cases also be applicable to larger reactors. So I think one of the key points is that when we're developing guidance that cover these types of new approaches, that it be clear in that guidance that, how can they be appropriately applied to different technologies, and we recognize that the risk profile of a 1 megawatt electric microreactor might be different than the risk profile of a 100 megawatt electric SMR, and so there is going to be, there can't be a one-size-fits-all approach, and there has to be a recognition that flexibility is going to be important for making sure that we have right-sized reviews for these reactors. And I think a lot of this is also going to be the responsibility of the applicants to clearly articulate why licensing approaches that they're pursuing are appropriate and technically justified for their designs.
Thank you. I'm going to stay with you for another question. Given the lower risk profiles of microreactors, can physical security, emergency planning zones, and staffing be right-sized proportionally? And how can risk reduction and public confidence be balanced?
Another easy one. Again, I'm going to go back first to the nth-of-a-kind microreactor licensing paper, and in two of the enclosures to that paper, we talked about security and emergency preparedness for microreactors. The thrust there was that for certain designs and deployment models, it may be possible to achieve a highly standardized approach for emergency preparedness and for security. So I think that in cases where there can be a high level of standardization and there's not a lot of dependence on site-specific factors, it's possible to reduce the scope of reviews from successive deployments and reduce the overall resources needed to ensure from a regulatory standpoint that the right emergency preparedness plans and security plans are in place. Again, a developer is going to need to justify what they think is the appropriate level, and the NRC is going to have to review and agree on that. But certainly some of the public meetings that we've had over this past year have touched on emergency preparedness and considering things like what do you need if you don't actually require any offsite protective actions. So I think there are opportunities based on these new technologies to rethink how we've approached these topics in the past and to find right-sized solutions.
Thank you, Duke. And we got 5 minutes left. I've got one more question that I'm going to pass down the line. I'm going to give Duke a break. You've been on the spotlight here now, so we'll close with starting with you, Mark. If we reconvene at the RIC in 5 years, what would success look like for microreactor deployment in the United States?
In 5 years, success would be commercially operating microreactors. We'll likely have more than one company doing that. They'll likely be serving more than one application. And we would have hundreds a year rolling off the production line.
Excellent. Thank you. Rita?
So in addition to that, but I'm going to reiterate what he said, so hundreds rolling off the line, commercial operation, and a steady supply of fuel that is needed for these reactors. So we didn't touch on that, but the fuel that's used in Readiness reactors, and the one that I showed you, is a TRISO fuel, and it does rely on high-assay, low-enriched uranium. And at the moment, it's not in high supply. There are efforts afoot by the U.S. government and others to change that. But it is a bottleneck in the supply chain, and it is one of the concerns that the community has, as could be something that is, if it's not addressed now, could prolong the massive deployment of microreactors.
Devin?
I'm going to take Mark's advice and not follow up a perfect answer here. So.
All right, I wasn't going to put you on the spot, but Duke, anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I think obviously success in 5 years for us is that we've enabled the technologies and that all the activities that have been conducted have been done safely and securely. I wanted to also say that for me, success in 5 years would be if instead of the NRC being referred to as the gold standard, that we went platinum.
So that brings us to a close. I want to give another round of applause and thank the fantastic panel. And I want to thank those individuals that helped to get this session to work as well as it did, all the coordination. So Maggie, Hannah, Jorge. I know Maggie's not here. She's probably listening online, but if we give them a round of applause. And I think last but not least, if we can thank our AV team. I think they've done a fantastic job. And thank you all for listening in to this session. I hope you enjoyed it. I think we tried to put together a very diverse panel to make you all see that this is real. And so I think we all feel it, very excited. And with that, I bring us to a close. And again, thank you all.